Along with apple pie and baseball, beer serves as one of the central components of American culture. The brewing of beer in America can be traced all the way back to the first settlers of the country. For over 100 years, Americans would enjoy a large assortment of beers, primarily brewed locally and in a relatively small scale. Although a variety of factors would allow a few very powerful brewers to gain control of the U.S. beer market. However, local breweries have managed to capture the public's interest once again. This renewed interest has sparked an American craft brew renaissance. The use of beer can be dated as far back as 6000 BC when it was first documented by the Babylonians. It is generally agreed upon by many historians that the origin of beer was likely a complete accident. Barley, a key ingredient in beer, was one of the most prominently used grains by the ancient civilizations surrounding the Mediterranean for making bread. It is commonly believed that at some point a container of barley was left outside in the rain. The addition of water to the container of barley created what would later become known as malt. When this malt was left outside again through another rain and allowed to mix with natural yeast in the air, the resulting concoction was beer. In the centuries to follow, its use would be passed down from one great civilization to the next. The Babylonians, Assyrians, and Egyptians would all consume beer as a key part of their diet. Thousands of years later, beer would still be consumed by the settlers of colonial America. Beer was such an important aspect of their daily lives that it would even have an impact on the landing of the Mayflower at Plymouth Rock. The Mayflower, which was originally intended to land further south, instead prematurely landed at Plymouth because, as one settler would explain,
"Our victuals being much spent, especially our beer."
Many of the nation's forefathers were brewers and strong proponents of beer, including William Penn, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Patrick Henry. During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress decreed that every American soldier fighting in the Revolution was to have a daily ration of a quart of beer. Americans had become incredibly fond of their beer, and would continue to drink it in large quantities. In the middle of the 19th century, an influx of German immigrants would lead to the creation of some of the most well-known names in the American brewing industry. With towns and cities forming all over the Midwest, German immigrants would flood into places such as Milwaukee and St. Louis with the hopes of creating a better life for themselves and their families. As all immigrant groups had before them, they would bring with them the fundamental pieces of their culture, including their beer. German lager beer was very different from the beers that were popular in America at the time. Most American beer drinkers were used to darker, heavier beers such as ales, porters, and stouts. However, Americans took fondly to lager beer, and the German brewers who produced them soon found themselves the heads of a brewing empire. Names like Pabst, Miller, and Anheuser-Busch would become synonymous with beer, and with sales rising, it seemed like nothing could slow them down. On January 29, 1920, the 18th Amendment went into effect, making the production, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages illegal. Unable to continue production, breweries all across the country would be forced to close their doors. Although Prohibition did not succeed in putting every brewery out of business. For those with enough money and resources, Prohibition did not mean the end of their business, only a transition in what they made. One of the common products brewers made during Prohibition was near beer. This new product contained the same color and taste of beer, but with less than 0.5% of alcohol by volume, it was not considered an alcoholic beverage. For brewers struggling to keep their doors open, this new beverage would be a saving grace. Because the process to make near beer was so similar to that of beer, brewers were able to continue producing without being forced to buy entirely new equipment or spending weeks retraining workers. While near beer still retained similarities to beer, it did not sell nearly as well, causing profits to plummet. This loss of profits would allow only the breweries with the largest financial reserves to stay afloat during the Prohibition years. After 13 long, dry years, Prohibition would finally come to an end on December 5, 1933. For the few breweries that had managed to maintain their equipment and workforce during Prohibition, its end would mean a return to business as usual. Americans had waited a long time for a beer, and these brewers were happy to give it to them. With most of the smaller breweries forced out of business during Prohibition, the large breweries in the Midwest would gain an incredible advantage on the competition. In the 1960s and 70s, the seeds of the craft brewing industry were being laid. With more and more Americans becoming concerned with the environment and turned off by big corporations, many beer enthusiasts would begin brewing their own beer. One of these homebrewers was Ken Grossman, founder of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Grossman, originally a homebrewer, would turn his passion into his career with the founding of Sierra Nevada in 1980. Grossman's success would be seen as an inspiration for brewers across the country. Sierra Nevada had demonstrated to prospective brewers that a small-scale brewery could have success in the American beer market, and they did not have to brew lager to do so.
The first time you have like a Sierra Nevada or something like that, it changes the whole thing.
In the wake of Grossman's success, more homebrewers would pursue the dream of owning their own brewery, and soon the country would see an incredible increase of breweries making a variety of different beers. In the decades since the opening of Sierra Nevada, the craft brewing industry has continued to grow and is becoming larger every year. With more and more people drinking craft beer, there has naturally been an increase of craft breweries.
Overall, beer plays a pretty big role in our society. I think craft beer is continuing to play a larger role. We reached the point last year in 2012 where we finally had as many breweries in the United States as there were pre-prohibition, which was crossing the 2,000 mark.
In 2011, the craft brewing industry saw a profit growth of 15%. This number would increase in 2012 to 17%. This growth of profit is a direct reflection of the change in consumer taste. One of the larger reasons many people are beginning to take an interest in craft beer is because of the more intimate experience that the craft industry offers.
Our brewery is set up, when you come into our tasting room, the tasting room is essentially a part of the brewery. So when you come into the brewery as one of our customers, it's really almost like inviting you into our home.
People can come into the brewery, they can get to know, you can go to any brewery in your neighborhood and you're going to be able to talk to the brewer, really get to have conversations that you'd never have with the bigger brewers. Just knowing where your beer comes from and all that, really connecting with your local brewer person as well, I think is huge.
The other large benefit of the craft beer industry is variety and quality. For years, the American beer market was dominated by large breweries, all producing relatively similar tasting lagers. While these beers were good in their own right, they still left a void for those interested in other styles of beer. With the rise of the craft beer industry, one is now able to try beers of all types.
I watch people that I know that would only drink Miller Lite go now are drinking, beers that I never thought I'd ever seen and enjoying it.
Along with the variety of styles, the craft beer industry has been able to produce beer with a level of quality and freshness that is hard for larger brewers to reproduce.
And we've turned down almost every state in the union for distribution because we firmly believe that beer is best and closest to the source. It's best when kept cold the entire time. It's easier to control your quality control, the quality of your product, your brand message, and where your beer is, how fresh it is when it's consumed by staying close to home.
With craft brewers making beers in such smaller batches and serving only their local communities, they are able to maintain the freshness of their beer much more easily. And ultimately, the quality of the brew is the only thing that matters. While the future is never certain, the craft brewing industry has sparked a renewed interest in beer, an interest which has developed into an American craft brew renaissance.